Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Nena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadhamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saritam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitam Shah Madeka Bandoma Sangen Maguro Man Mahadana Manistara Kama Bhagya Marananda Namostute. Narada Muni began to explain about the origins of the supernatural enmity of Shishupal, that you can hate someone incessantly to the point that you're constantly meditating upon them, is indeed supernatural. In the material world, it's not actually possible to continuously hate someone throughout the hours of one's, waking life and dream life, because the gunas of Prakriti are always vying for supremacy. So hate is related to the tamas guna of Prakriti. But sometimes that guna will be suppressed by goodness or passion. And so when it's suppressed, you cannot be in a hateful absorption in a particular object. You'll become absorbed in other things. In passion, you'll become absorbed in the pursuit of objects, and goodness, you'll become absorbed in something else. But that someone can be constantly absorbed in a particular object because of enmity is indicating something supernatural about that. So since enmity is not a proper path towards absorption in Krishna, Narada Muni had concluded with a statement kind of giving the origin story of the supernatural enmity of Shishupal. So that led to Yudhishthira Maharaj inquiring about that history and specificity, particularly because Narada Muni had told that, in fact, Shishupal was once a gatekeeper in the spiritual world. So who was later on overcome by a curse. Yudhishthira Maharaj says, I can't find this to be a credible statement. He said, this is not credible because the bodies of the residents of the spiritual world are made out of Shuddha Sattva. Their bodies are in fact made out of Sattva Guna, so they cannot be overcome by material anything, including a curse. So this statement that they were cursed by the Kumaras and therefore they had to take on material bodies, this is just actually unbelievable. I cannot accept it. And so having made this particular statement and protest to what Narada said, Narada begins telling the history. Starting with verse 36, there are very few commentaries to these verses, so we just read them and conclude the chapter today. So this is starting with verse number 36. The great Saint Narada said, once upon a time, when the four sons of Lord Brahma, named Sanaka, Sanandana, Sanatana, and Sanakumara, were wandering throughout the three worlds, they came by chance to Vishnuloka. Although these four great sages were older than Brahma's other sons, like Marichi, they appeared like small naked children, only 5 or 6 years old. When Jaya saw them trying to enter Vaikuntha-loka, these two gatekeepers, thinking them ordinary children, forbade them to enter. Thus checked by the doorkeepers, Jaya and Vijay, Sanandana and the other great sages very angrily cursed them. You two foolish doorkeepers, they said, being agitated by the material qualities of passion and ignorance, you are unfit to live at the shelter of Madhudrisha's lotus feet, which are free from such modes. It would be better for you to go immediately to the material world and take your birth in the family of most sinful asuras. While Jaya and Vijay, thus cursed by the sages, were falling into the material world, they were addressed as follows by the same sages who were very kind to them. O doorkeepers, after 3 births, you will be able to return to your positions in Vaikuntha Loka, for then the duration of the curse would have ended. These 2 associates of the Lord, Jaya and Vijay, later descended to the material world, taking birth as the 2 sons of Diti, Hiranyakashipu being the elder, Hiranyaksha the younger. They were very much respected by the Daityas and Danavas, demonic species. Appearing as Nrsimhadev, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Hari, killed Hiranyakashipu. When the Lord delivered the planet Earth, which had fallen in the Garbhutaka ocean, Hiranyaksha tried to hinder him, and then the Lord, as Varaha, killed Hiranyaksha. Desiring to kill his son Prahlad, who was a great devotee of Lord Vishnu, Hiranyakashipu tortured him in many ways. The Lord, the super soul of all living entities, is sober, peaceful, and equal to everyone. Since the great devotee Prahlad was protected by the Lord's potency, Hiranyakashipu was unable to kill him, in spite of endeavoring to do so in various ways. So we're going to take a quick pause here at verse 43. So Narada Muni's answer as such is just an unfolding of the Leela that took place that led to the descent of Jaya and Vijay into the material world, as we had mentioned yesterday, that when the Lord's actions are for himself and by himself. So whatever, and therefore his actions are called as Leelas. So usually the word that we use for action is karma. And Jiva Goswami has defined karma in a very interesting way in the Bhagavad Sandarbha. He says karma is that which an unfulfilled person does to become fulfilled. One who is apurna means incomplete, or it means a feeling of incompletion. So when you're feeling incomplete, then you do some activity in order to become complete. That is called as karma. So like, for example, when you are having some hunger in the belly, there's some incompletion is there. So then you do some karma, like on eat, in order to fill the belly so that you feel complete in the belly. That is called karma. So the Lord is not apurna in any way. There's no incompletion in him. So he cannot perform karma as is defined in this particular way. So his actions are due to the joy of self, like the overflow, like when milk overflows. So in the same way, when there's the overflow of joy, that also leads to a type of movement or action. And that movement that is a result of the overflow of Ananda is called as Leela. Just like in Mahaprabhu Leela, the spreading of the Prem Sankirtan movement is described as an inundation of prema, an inundation like a flood. Everyone was just getting caught up in that flood. So this is called as Leela, when there's an overpour of the Ananda. So everything Krishna does is Leela. There's no karma in that. And his Leelas are only performed with his associates, or those who, it's only performed with the internal energy. It's not performed with any elements that are not the internal energy. So that was the importance of the first passage in this chapter. Even when it looks like God is engaging in pastimes, taking assistance from the devas or fighting with their swords, in fact, he is not being assisted or opposed by them, but rather it is the internal energy that is infused into them that he is actually playing with. It is all just his Leela. So when Jaya and Vijay are cursed, there is also another Leela only. It cannot be otherwise, because they are the eternal associates of the Lord, whose bodies themselves are made of this spiritual substance. And so there was some Leela to be performed. And basically, the Leela is God wants to descend into the material world. He wants to fight with he wants to do some fighting. So who can fight with God other than those who are particularly empowered by him? That was Jaya and Vijay. So this whole Kumars coming to the gate of Vaikuntha, cursing them to take birth, this is all part of the unfolding of some particular Leela of God. So that is being described here. So the births that they take, as the story goes, I don't know where this is coming. I've been hearing this for years. I don't know the actual reference for this, but they were given the option. Jaya and Vijay apparently were given the option to come to the material world in 7 lives they will spend as bhaktas, or in 3 lives they can spend as demons opposed to the Lord. And they selected 3 lives as demons, fully absorbed in the Lord. Again, their supernatural absorption is due to their supernatural origins. And in that way, they can come back to their original post as gatekeepers at Vaikuntha in a very efficient way. So this is also being discussed here, but it's saying that here the Brahmana said after 3 births, you will come back to your original position as doorkeepers, Jai Vijay. So their first birth was as Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha. So Hiranyakashipu is one powerful demon. Hiranyaksha, they were also another powerful demon. They were brothers. And they were born of the womb of Diti. So Diti is the mother of all the demons. Like in Christianity, they call her, I think they call her like Lilith or something like that. She's the mother of all the deep demonic species. And her first 2 sons are Hiranyakashipu, Hiranyaksha. So he's telling a little bit of their history and how the Lord killed them. Particularly with verse 43, what's being described here, which is interesting, is that Hiranyakashipu had a son. So his son's name was Prahlad Maharaj. So Prahlad Maharaj is just being described here. Now, Prabhupada translated this verse as a description of the Lord, but Sri Vishwanath has given this verse as a description of Prahlad Maharaj. So the word here is tam. The first word in the Sanskrit is tam. So tam means him. So him, who is this him? So Prabhupada is taking this him as the Supreme Lord, and Sri Vishwanath is taking this him as Prahlad Maharaj, because in the previous verse, Prahlad Maharaj is brought up as the son of Hiranyakashipu who was tortured by his father. So him, either the Supreme Lord or Prahlad Maharaj, is Sarva Bhutatma Bhutam. So he is of all the Sarva Bhuta, means of all the living entities that come into being. He is the Atma Bhutam. So Atma means the soul. He's a super soul of all living entities. Or the idea here is that just as you find your own soul to be dear, so other entities found Prahlad Maharaj to be very dear. You understand? Whatever you do in this life, you do for your own self, is it not? That's a fact. Everything you do basically for your own happiness. And other people's happiness becomes a concern for you only if it's related to you. It is not separate from you. So just as you do everything for your own self, people were finding Prahlad Maharaj as the self of all selves to be as dear to them as they are to themselves. This is speaking of the sort of supernatural influence of great souls, that people find them, ordinary living entities, when they're in the presence of great souls, the influence of the great soul is such that these living entities will take that living entity to be more dear, or as dear at least, as their own self. And just as you do anything for your own self, you'll do anything for this object of affection. It doesn't mean a sarvabhutatma bhutam. Just like in Prabhupada's Leela, for example, there's so many Leelas like this, but in Prabhupada's, stories you hear, this one is sticking out right now, where Prabhupada was in Delhi with some of the first disciples, and he had met someone, some Indian person, saying, hey, if you come to Delhi, you do some particular program, then we can help spread Krishna consciousness movement, something to that effect. So they were on the train, and the train had stopped at Delhi, and Prabhupada just told 3 of his disciples to get off and try to do something. Now, these disciples didn't know where they were at. This was their first time in India. They didn't know, they had no means, like no financial, they didn't know who they were going to be staying with or anything like that. But Prabhupada simply said, get off and try to start something. And they all just got off the train and began trying to start some movement there in Delhi. So that story always strikes me as strange, because if you ask any postmodern disciple to do like this, they'll call it as abuse. And they'll call the, organization on these people. This is pastoral. They have this phrase, pastoral abuse, where the pastors are abusing their constituency. But the idea here is that they found Prabhupada to be so dear that they were willing to take any and all sorts of risks just for the pleasure of Prabhupada. Or Prabhupada asking many disciples to go to dangerous areas to preach Krishna consciousness, like Palestine or China. And the devotees just agreeable to that without any questions asked. So as you find yourself to be dear, you find such an entity to be at least as dear or even more dear than your own self, meaning that you're prepared to sacrifice everything for that person. So Prahlad Maharaj was like this, or this is a reference to the Super Soul. Prahlad was also Prashantam. Prashantam means peaceful, because even though he was persecuted and tortured by his father in the most heinous ways, which we'll hear a little bit about in the upcoming chapters, he remained undisturbed by that. Samadharshana means to see with the equal vision. So despite being persecuted, his vision of the soul underneath it all was not lost. So Bhagavat Tejasa Sprishtam, he was touched by the power of God. Bhagavat Tejasa Sprishtam means because he was empowered by the power of God, although Hiranyakashipu tried to kill him, Nashokno Dhantum Udyamai, he was not able to do so, even by the various methods that he applied. So this little description is going to pique Yudhishthira Maharaj's interest. It's going to lead to a further question, but we'll move on. Next verse. Thereafter, the same Jaya and Vijaya, the two doorkeepers of Lord Vishnu, took birth as Ravana and Kumbhakarna, begotten by Vishrava in the womb of Keshini. They were extremely troublesome to all the people of the universe. So Narada Muni continued, my dear king, just to relieve Jaya and Vijaya of the Brahmin's curse, Lord Ramchandra appeared in order to kill Ravana and Kumbhakarna. It will be better for you to hear narrations about Lord Ramchandra's activities from Markandeya. Okay. So in their third birth, the same Jaya and Vijaya appeared in the family of Kshatriyas as your cousins, the sons of your aunt. Because Lord Krishna has struck them with his disc, all their sinful reactions have been destroyed, and now they are free from the curse. I think this verse is kind of important. Next verse. These two associates of Lord Vishnu, Jaya and Vijay, maintained a feeling of enmity for a very long time. Because of always thinking of Krishna in this way, they regained the shelter of the Lord, having returned home back to Godhead. So he just described the three births that Jaya and Vijay took. First is Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha. Second birth as Ravana and Kumbhakarna. And third birth as Kamsa and Dantavakra. And in each of those births, they were killed by Bhagavan. So this is meant to show that Bhagavan does everything for the happiness of his devotees. On the outside, Jaya and Vijay appeared as demons, but on the inside, they were actually bhaktas. So Bhagavan killed the external covering of these bhaktas and allowed them to be reinstated in their constitutional position as loving servants. From the external perception, it looks like Bhagavan is killing those who are opposed to him and favoring the devatas. This comes back to the themes of the first passage of this chapter. But actually, whatever Bhagavan is doing is in fact for the pleasure of his devotees. So when he kills Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha as Nrsimha Dev, he does so not because he has animosity for Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, but he does so because he has affection for Jaya and Vijay. So he removes the external covering in the form of their bodies, Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, and allows them to be reinstated as Jaya and Vijay. So this is true for the two subsequent births that they take. From the eye of the Leela, just hearing the story told, it is Bhagavan having animosity for demons. But for those who know the true position, the true tattva underlying the Leela, it is actually for the pleasure of his devotees, who are all part of the eternal energy. So this story is meant to be a support of those themes that we heard in the first part of the chapter. Verse 47 here is an echo of the second important passage that we have been discussing very carefully in the last week. So Vaira Anubhanda Tivrena. So Tivrena means like intense. Vaira Anubhanda means bound by intense enmity. All these demons had Dhyanena Chuta Satmatam Nito. Dhyanena means they achieved intense meditation on Achyuta. Dhyanena Chuta Satmatam Nito. And because of their intense meditation on Vishnu, Nito Puna Harer Parshram, they again attained proximity of the Lord. So the idea here is that because they are the gatekeepers, when they were killed by the Supreme Lord, especially in that third birth, when they were killed by the disc, what everyone saw was the demons' souls entering into the body of Krishna. So everyone thought that they had attained Sayuja Mukti. And that is what has led to Yudhishthira Maharaj's question: how do these demons attain Sayuja Mukti, which is very rare for even spiritual transcendentalists to attain after thousands of births and tries? Actually, they did not attain Sayuja Mukti. They merged into the body of Krishna. And inside the body of Krishna were the other forms of Bhagavan. As you know, and this is another theological point beyond the scope of what we're discussing today. But when Krishna descends into the material world, because he is Swayam Bhagavan, or the origin of all the forms of Bhagavan. So when Krishna descends into the material world, all the forms of Bhagavan merge into him or come along with him. So all the forms of Bhagavan are in the body of Krishna when he descends into the material world. So the form of Narayana is also in the body of Krishna. So when Jaya and Vijay were killed in the last birth as Kamsa and Dantavakra by Krishna's disc, then they merged into the body of Krishna from the purview of the audience looking at that. But they actually went inside the body of Krishna and waited with their Lord Narayana, who was also situated there. And then when Krishna completed his leelas in Dwapara Yuga, he leaves the world, then they go back to Vaikuntha along with their Lord Narayana. So that is what is actually taking place. So it says here, by their meditation, Achyuta Satmatam Nitopu Hare Prashram. They again attained Hari Parshram, proximity with their Lord Hari, the spiritual world. Jak Maktur Vishnu Parshado. And they again became Vishnu Parshado, means gatekeepers or associates of Lord Vishnu. So this is also echoing the point that their meditation on the Lord, which is due to intense bondage of enmity, Vairānubhandativrena, its origin is because they are Vishnu Parshado, because they are already associates of Vishnu. Their constitutional nature is to be absorbed in Vishnu. So even when they come as demons, their natural tendency is exhibited even in the body of a demon as a supernatural enmity. Otherwise, it's not possible to hate someone perpetually. You'll hate, I mean, I'm sure you have the experience of hating someone, but now you're not thinking about them so much. Only because I've mentioned it, now they come into mind. Otherwise, when you hate someone, you don't care for them. Let them be there only. So last verses of this chapter, Yudhishthira Maharaj has a question. His interest is piqued. This is the last verse. Maharaj Yudhishthira inquired, "O my lord, Narada Muni, why was there such enmity between Hiranyakashipu and his beloved son Prahlad Maharaj? How did Prahlad Maharaj become such a great devotee of Lord Krishna? Kindly explain this to me." So hearing about Hiranyakashipu's animosity towards Prahlad, who was his own son and a great devotee, and we heard he was such a great devotee that his influence was that when people would be in his presence, they would take him to be dearer than their own self. That was his general influence on the entities around him, but not his father. So this piques Yudhishthira Maharaj's interest. So he asked one question about this. How is this possible that this was his own son, first of all? So usually you have affection for those that you consider to be yours, right? I and mine, you have deep affection. I always like to tell this story when I always kind of get the details wrong, but when Hari Sham was rooming with Lokaram Prabhu in Chicago, and someone broke into their room, and Lokaram comes out and says, my computer got stolen. And Hari Shah, I'm sorry, it's just such a good example. It's very funny. Hari Shah, it's just like Krishna serendipitously had me see that particular scene so that it would be always an available example for this I and my point. Sorry, so not making fun of you. I just think it's a good example of the thing, of course. And Hari Shah was very detached when Lokaram said his computer got stolen. When then Lokaram said your computer also got stolen, then Hari Shah became very visibly disturbed. Well, not acted out this time, but he was very visibly disturbed. So usually when something is identified as yours, you are very concerned about that thing. That's the point. So here's your son. Usually you have affection for what you consider to be yours, but yet he had such intense hatred for his son. And the nature of his son's influence was that anyone who was around him, they would take him to be more dear to their own self. But that didn't happen to Hiranyakashipu. So Yudhishthira Maharaj is interested about this. So he inquires about this. What is this story? Can you unpack that story a little bit more? So now for the up to chapter 10, we're going to be hearing the story of Prahlad Maharaj and Hiranyakashipu, Prahlad Charita. This is one of the most famous stories in Srimad Bhagavatam. It's a very beautiful section of the Bhagavatam. That ends the chapter, so we're going to pause here and see if anyone wants to say anything on any of the things that we've encountered in this chapter. So what happened to Jaya and Vijaya in between each of the three births? Where did their souls go? Why is that important to you? I don't know the answer to that question also.
Wait, you answered actually. You said that after each one, externally looks like they reached Sayuja Mukti, but actually it wasn't. They just merged into the body of Narayan, and they just waited in his body and then came out, until the very last birth. But it was just a technical question. It was just a passing thought. But you answered it.
Yeah, that was for the last birth. That happened after the last birth, maybe. So this is proof that it's actually impossible for a normal, quote unquote, normal human being to be so negatively absorbed in Krishna. Yeah. The reason it's not possible for normal people to be absorbed in hatred is because they're under the influence of the gunas. So hatred comes from the tama guna, like especially the hatred that transforms into destructive energy. Because tamas is related to destruction, right? Rajas to creation, sattva to sustenance, and tamas to destruction. So when you have that hatred where you can like kill someone or you want to see them destroyed in some way, that is tamasic. But because all of us under the influence of the gunas, we cannot perpetually remain in tamas. Sometimes the rajas element becomes prominent. And then we get preoccupied with chasing after our dreams, chasing after objects. And then sometimes the sattva element becomes prominent. And then you just want to chill and contemplate, And then again, when it comes back to tamas, then again, I could kill him, he should die. So as long as you're under the influence of the gunas, you can't remain perpetually absorbed in the emotional state of hatred. But the fact that all these demons were able to do so is indicating something supernatural about them. And indeed, it is because they are, in fact, Vishnu Parshado. They are, in fact, the associates of Vishnu, whose natural state is to be absorbed in Krishna. So even when they have bodies that are pratikula, unfavorable to Krishna, their supernatural quality is infused into that, and they become absorbed in Krishna energy. So it is a very supernatural thing. It is a supernatural ability due to their supernatural origins, correct? So, and to clarify, Diti was not actually an asura, correct? She was a mother of the Suras, Daitas, but was not one herself. She was married to Kashyapa Muni, remember from last canto. Yeah, that's a good question, actually. Diti is a progenitor, like her husband. Her progenitor means one who's responsible for producing the population in the universe. And she just happens to be the progenitor of the demonic species. I don't think we would call her an asura as such, though. It's a good question. I don't know. Intuitively, my answer would be no. And we'll see that she is like a very pious lady. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think we would probably refer to her as an asura. Interesting question. Never thought about that. Hari Sham says, Maharaj Yudhishthira's question is a bit strange. He just heard that these Vaikuntavasis took the form of demons. So why is it a surprise that they don't love their own child? Well, actually, the nature of the demon is to be absorbed in the Bali concept of life. That is one way. This is how you become demonic. The more you fix in Bali concept, I and mind become very strong. So it is actually saying that demons, they work very hard for their families and in opposition to other families. That is a very common behavioral trait of the demonic species. They want to see to the success and expansion of their dynasties. Like Dhritarashtra not being able to part with the kingdom because he wanted his sons headed by Duryodhana to be successful. So this is a very normal trait of the demonic species, to be so absorbed in I am I, my body, and those things that are related to my body, like my children. Of course, in certain instances, it can happen that their children appear to be a threat to their purposes. So that was the vision of Hiranyakashipu to his son. He will even say that I forget he gives this analogy later on, we'll hear about it, where he says, like, if one of your bodies, if a portion of your body's affected by some disease like gangrene, then you're prepared to chop off even that part of the body. Otherwise, the whole body will be killed. So then you'll chop off that part of the body that has the disease portion in it. So in the same way, he was saying Prahlada is like gangrene on the family dynasty. And so we have to be prepared to chop it off. So only when a family member is seen as some threat to I am I, then you become antagonistic. Otherwise, there's a general tendency for the demons to work for their families. That is also seen today in politics, right? Who is this? Joe Biden. So he has this son. I think his son's name is Hunter Biden. And his son has some computer sims. I haven't really kept up with American politics too much because it's just the ghetto, and there's no end to it. The level of cheating and deceit going on. But he has some computer, I think, and it had a lot of incriminating evidence on it. And they made some politics to get his son acquitted, and that no one could read the evidence from the computer. So everyone's working like this. Demons is a general MO. So it is not a surprising thing, actually. Demons actually work for the welfare of what they consider to be I am I. So that he would consider Prahlad Maharaj a threat just by his being is a little bit astonishing. So that's why Yudhishthira Maharaj is asking a question like this. Also, he, wants to hear the story of Prahlad Maharaj because it's very nice. So why not? Okay, anyone else wants to say anything? We've encountered some very important passages in this first chapter. It's a chapter everyone should know nicely.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I was just reflecting that yesterday. I was having some argument with a government official, and I realized that he was treating me very unfairly, whatever way. And I had so much by the end of that, so much hate in my heart. I was like, man, what's happening here? And then I went for a walk and running. I changed my modes of nature. And after that running, I was like, it's gone. I didn't feel so much heavy at that moment. So I was just reflecting on that the nature of hate and love of this material world is that if you change the modes, then its intensity also changes. At that moment, it was I was very intense. Hey, this guy is really cheating us. But after that, spending some time outside, taking a break.
I don't know, it froze a little. That's a good example, though.
Yeah.
You froze a little, but that's a good example. You felt intense. Hey, he's like, let me go for a run. And then after you go for a run, you're just like, okay, let's have a smoothie. And then you just move on with life. But with Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, even if they go for a run, it will still happen.
Yeah.
So it is a very strange thing to see, actually. That's
now, what about those people who are from their child told about hey, these people are your enemies, and they keep hearing their whole life, the education they get, and then they grow up to just hate the other community.
I think we know what you're talking about. But, so that means that means that the tamas element is predominating quality in their life, right? But it is actually seen even with these sort of teachings, for example, over the period of centuries, you'll see that the dynasties, they lose some of their edge as time is passing by, as they get disconnected from the teachings and that tamasic element. Then you see that they become softer. When you get to Mahaprabhu's Leela, a lot of the the like Muslim magistrates and so on, they were like very relaxed, very chill. And a lot of their servants were Hindus. They didn't have any problem with that. And they would even acknowledge and appreciate their devotion. So you see with the passing of time, as the gunas are changing, then people change along with that flow. But only when that element is kept at play constantly. It would have to be constantly nourished in order for you to stay perpetually like that. So you have to like constantly hear like that, constantly be trained to think in a certain way. Otherwise, it's actually impossible. You cannot stay perpetually in a hateful condition.
And Prabhu, I have one more thing. Thank you for sharing that. Now, this point about Sarva Bhuta Bhut Atma, how he's like the soul of the soul, how they're so dear to the soul. Now, I feel like, at least myself, maybe it's because I'm Indian, there's this desire to give oneself to a cause and to a person. Like, I adore my spiritual master.
Computer is freezing. Your computer is freezing a lot.
Okay. I turned the video off. Maybe that might help. So I was saying this thing of giving oneself completely to a cause or a person. I have that desire. At the same time, I feel it has to be balanced by taking an individual ownership about building my own personality or individuality. So although one should be completely dedicated to serve the divine couple Shri Radha Krishna through the blessings of, or through the guidance, under the guidance of the spiritual masters, at the same time one should also develop one's individuality. I was thinking that there has to be some kind of like a balance there between surrender and development of one's individuality.
Yeah, my answer to that is that usually when you surrender something, you're surrendering as the self that you are. So whatever you are, you're bringing that self to the Guru or to Krishna, and you're surrendering that. So if you're an artist, now I'm surrendering that artist person to the Guru. So what does that mean? The art that I would do normally for myself, I can now do for Krishna. If I'm a business person, then I'm surrendering that business person to Krishna or to the Guru. And now that business self, I can use in the service of Krishna instead of in the service of the self. So there should be some identity that you have, and that identity you're bringing to the Guru. And you're surrendering that self. So that whatever that self is normally doing for sense gratification, that self can now do for the service of the mission. So the surrender of the self is not the extinguishing of the ego, so to speak. I was telling this yesterday. I was having a meeting with one of the ashram girls here. She wanted to talk to me because she was getting a little bit, burnt out a little bit. So, and the burned out part was this sense of like always having to I let go of this, I let go of that, I'm let go of. So she had this fear about losing herself because of having to let go of everything, which seems to be the Christian conscious message. So I told her maybe a better word than letting go is transmute. I said a lot of, we have this like strong renounced edge to a lot of our messaging. I said, maybe you should use the word transmute. It's not that something has to be let go, it just has to be transmutated. So transmutation means whatever it is just upbuilt or transformed, in a way that is more divinely oriented versus profanely oriented. So I was asking her to look at her art in terms of a transmutation sort of angle instead of a let go angle. So bring that self that you are and just transmute it. Instead of serving the mundane, you can use that to serve the spiritual. This seems to be the very simple message that Prabhupada has given also. But somehow the renounce thing comes up, so we feel like we have to let go of all that we are in order to be surrendered. So some of the unhealthy practical parts, we have to let go of that stuff. But there are many. What is Krishna Chandra doing? Oh, I don't know about this. I'm not an introvert. So that's my intuition.
Too much love here, Prabhu. Too much love.
That's what I'm going to say to that particular.
Well, I have a follow-up thing. Then how does one decide that how much one should invest in building oneself versus surrendering oneself, which one already has?
What do you mean by building oneself?
Like, time for, like, you can spend practical the whole day, reflecting, learning this, learning that. There's so many things to learn and educate oneself in, and then, or you can spend a lot of time, like just doing what needs to be done, and there's no end to doing what needs to be done in a ISKCON center. You can work at the whole life and still things which need to be done won't ever be finished.
There's probably different angles you can take on this, but I'm just going to share this one thing. When I was in Braj from years ago, I was there with a friend that was in the ashram with us in Chicago. So he was kind of young. He was a young devotee, and when he joined the ashram, he wasn't really doing anything with his life. So when the ashram came forward, I was like, okay, I'll do this. Like, he would literally have done anything probably, but somehow when the devotees came in his life, he said, okay, then I'll do this. He didn't have anything that he had to actually let go of or surrender to Krishna consciousness. So later on, he wanted to take initiation from Babaji at the Jiva Institute. But Babaji told him that he needed some ego first. He said, because you can't really surrender unless you have some ego, some sense of identity. Otherwise, you're not letting go of anything. You're not really bringing anything to the surrender. You're just doing whatever is available to you at that particular time. And then when something else is available to you, then you'll just do that. So he told him to, like, kind of build himself up a little bit, like empirically, so that there was actually something to surrender. Otherwise, there's nothing to surrender. And I found that to be interesting. I don't find it to be necessarily 100% true. I think that you could join the movement and kind of build some sort of ego around, like, being a brahmachari, for example, or being, a temple sevak, and then from there make further progress. But I did find it to be an interesting insight that, that without a sense of self, then you just jump from one thing to another, whatever is appealing to your senses at that particular time. So there was something to that. That's all I'm saying. There's something to the idea of identifying what you are, so to speak, in an empirical sense, and then bringing that to Krishna, whatever it is. Otherwise, one of the ways that souls find meaning in this world is by offering their creative talents to the world, and so identifying something in that arena seems to be something that could be useful in that regard. I thought that to be an interesting insight, at least.
Well, thank you for answering that. Would you say that our identity, building our identity also changes as we go more deep, in deep into life? Because from just offering our creative talents, it becomes offering spiritual talents, which is offering wonderful prayers, certain by acharyas, or healing and chanting, offering that into the process.
Ultimately, the way that Sri Vishwanath and his Madhurya Kadambini, if you study the last shower, he's described the path of progress in terms of the transformation of the ego, the transformation of the ahamameti, right? That's how he actually describes the process of Shraddha to Prema, as a transformation of the I concept and the my concept. So you can say that identity, they're like different shells of identity, and one identity helps bring you to one level, and then that has to crack so that the deeper identity can emerge, and then that has to crack so the deeper identity can emerge. And ultimately, the deepest identity is the one with the Siddha Deha, right? That is the real identity that we want to develop. So that means that in the beginning, we're having a sort of empiric identity that is helping hold our practice in terms of Shravan Kirtan. And as our Shravan Kirtan taste expands, especially expands to the point of Krishna Lila, and you start to hear the Leelas of Krishna that attracts your heart, then your work starts to transform. Your work in the realm of devotional service starts to transform tremendously. As you start to zoom in on those Leelas and on those personalities whose love is attractive to you, and then your self-notion starts to be centered around emulating the various idiosyncrasies of that identity and whose love is attractive to you. And then the empirical identity is only like a temporary container helping you to hold those practices until your mind can really, how you say, attain a vesha. Swarupa vesh, we sometimes use this word swarupa vesh. Swarupa vesh means absorption in the swarup of the siddha bhakta. And then as we attain that swarupa vesh, then all empirical identities fall away in their own natural way, as you're now absorbed in the love and the identity of one of Krishna's Siddha Bhaktas. So in that sense, we can go back and look at that section on our own in the Madhurya Kandambini. But the transformation of identity is in fact what Krishna consciousness seems to be all about. But in the very beginning, we have to bring that empirical identity. We have to reconcile the empirical identity to our spirituality. So it's not like you'll be able to just let it go because you're not that advanced. No one can just let it go. You can let it go and it rears ugly head in some other way. So you reconcile it to spirituality, and then as your taste improves for Shraddha and Kirtan, then your work of transforming identity can begin in truth.
Thank you, Prabhu. This was wonderful. Happy to hear this from you.
Go and check it out. Madhurya Kandambini is a very interesting section. He explains the path of the sadhana krama from faith to prema, not only in terms of the transformation of identity, but the very last part of the book is in terms of the transformation of the contemplative life. What happens to the mind and how it gets absorbed from Shraddha to prema. So those two sections of Madhurya Kandambini are probably the most valuable sections in terms of getting a clear identity of the process and how it transforms us in both our sense of identity and in the sense of our contemplative life. And then you make some judgment based on that. They're very interesting. Okay, well, I think that's it. Agel wants to say something. We'll close it up with her as usual.
Yeah, just referring back to this discussion about whether Ditya was an asura. I isn't it that, as you said, she was a progenitor?
Yes.
Right? And so, as such, I'm not sure, do progenitors do their work as a service to Vishnu? In which case,
ultimately, it is a service to Vishnu. He wants the universe to be populated.
Yeah, so they're consciously doing it as a service to Krishna, or Vishnu, isn't it? And so, wouldn't that necessarily make them suras, not asuras?
Yeah, there's some type of bhaktas. So that seems correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okie dokie. So we'll pause here for today. Nitai Gaur, Radhe Shyam, Jai Krishna Balaram, Shri Radha Govinda ki Jai, Shri Prabhupada ki Jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jai. Go Premanandi, Hari Hari Go, Hari Hari Go, Hari Hari.